It's hard to describe such an accident. A short, routine flight that turns into a fight for survival, with the pilots refusing to surrender like samurais. More than 500 people perishing, all because of one simple mistake. A fatal mistake. How did it come to be this way? What could have led to what is now known today as the deadliest single plane crash in aviation history? August 12th, 1985, Tokyo, Japan. It's the eve of Obon, a traditional Japanese holiday where people traditionally honor their ancestors, often returning to their place of birth for family reunions or to hit up local resorts. As such, all forms of Japanese transit are busy. Roads jam-packed with traffic, trains filled to the brim, including the famous Shinkansen bullet trains, and of course, airports flocking with people. In fact, air travel is so popular here, Japan Airlines, the national air carrier of Japan, has to use Boeing 747s even on short internal flights, specifically the 747 SR-46s, basically a 747-100 that traded fuel tank size for passenger capacity and strengthened structural supports to deal with frequent takeoffs and landings. Today, one of these SRs, JA-8119, comes in for a landing as Japan Airlines Flight 366 at Haneda Airport in Tokyo from Fukuoka at 1712 local time. This plane was built in 1974 and at the time accumulated more than 25,000 flight hours. Rather quickly, the plane is turned around and prepped for its next journey as Japan Airlines Flight 123, being pushed from Gate 18 and taking off from runway 15 left at 1812, running 12 minutes late, heading for Itami Airport in Osaka. It should be a short flight lasting less than an hour. On the flight deck is a very well-experienced crew. Captain Masami Takahama is 49 years old and has logged over 12,424 hours of flying time, with just under 5,000 being in the Boeing 747. On this flight, he'll be handling the radio while observing the performance of his first officer, Yutaka Sasaki, age 39. He's sitting in the captain's seat flying the plane, as 123 is one of his final evaluation flights, and is looking forward to his eventual promotion to captain if all goes well. He's logged just under 4,000 hours of flying time, with about half of them being in the 747. Hiroshi Fukuda, aged 46, rounds out the three-man flight crew as the flight engineer, logging 9,831 flight hours, with just under 4,000 in the 747. The plane is near full capacity, carrying 509 passengers and a crew of 15. Among the passengers was Ku Sakamoto, a famous singer and actor best known for his song Yuyo Mutri Aruko, also known as Sukiyaki in English markets, and flight attendant Yumi Ochiai. She, however, was off duty that day, but would be more than ready to assist her fellow comrades should an emergency present itself, something she'd be known for later on. Initially, the flight is uneventful, apart from a passenger asking to use the bathroom before the seatbelt light is turned off 12 minutes into the flight. It's an ordinary request on a routine day. Then, without warning, plane suffers from explosive decompression, blowing most of the tail off and bringing down the ceiling around the rear toilets. The pilots are taken aback by this, and at first think the landing gear doors have blown off. Without hesitation, they set the transponder to broadcast a distress signal and radio air traffic control to declare an emergency.
Okay, it's been 1, 2, 3, we got several requests turn back to
Roger, approve as requested. Roger, you want right or left turn? Right heading 090, redirect to Oshima.
While the plane turns the correct way, the captain warns of the steep bank. The first officer is trying to steady the aircraft, but to no effect. The flight engineer then informs the two that the hydraulic fluid pressure is depleting, the fluid being what manipulates the control surfaces on the aircraft, the elevator that makes it go up and down, and the rudder and ailerons that help it turn left and right. Since many junctions of the hydraulic lines pass through the tail, the plane is losing that control very quickly.
Daniel, 1, 2, 3, confirm you are declaring emergency, is that right? 1, 2, 3, roger. And request your nature of emergency.
The pilots, however, don't respond as they're trying to regain control of this frail bird. Frustratingly, the plane isn't turning right, but begins to veer off its course and drift away from Haneda. The plane also starts to enter the phugoid cycle. First it climbs steeply, then stalls, tips over, and dives only to regain speed and climb again like a roller coaster. Without hydraulic pressure, there's little the crew can do to fight it. Not only that, the crew seems to also be battling hypoxia. At over 22,000 feet in the air, there's little oxygen, which can cause difficulty breathing and confusion, clouding judgment. That's without mentioning the Dutch roll making the aircraft yaw side to side as a result of the loss of the tail.
Daniel, 124, fly heading 090, redirect to Oshima. Ground control, roger, understood.
Air traffic control then gives the idea for the plane to land at Nagoya. It's a near straight line, but the pilots would have to descend right away if they want to land there.
Daniel, 123, can you descend? Alright, say altitude now. Alright, your position 17 miles to Nagoya. Yeah, can you run to Nagoya? Alright, これから日本語で話していただいて結構ですから。
The captain declines. He wants Haneda. It's a bigger airport, more suited for a 747, especially in an emergency. The pilots then try using the only control they have left, the engines. Throttling the engines up causes the plane to accelerate and raise the nose. Idling them back down causes the plane to slow and descend. Then they try directional thrust by slowing the engines on the right side and increasing speed on the other side, which in turn causes the plane to bank and turn right towards Haneda. While very elementary, it does seem to help flatten out the roller coaster ride of the phugoid and get the plane back northward toward Haneda and eventually safety. While this is going on, the flight engineer is talking to the stewards, thinking that the baggage compartment has collapsed as his alarm panel shows the R5 door is broken. He would later report this to Japan Air Tokyo, but this alarm was merely a short caused by the prior mentioned ceiling collapse around the rear toilets. He also reports that the oxygen masks in the cabin have stopped working, resulting in the flight attendants to be passing around oxygen via whiffs from a gas bottle. He also recommends an emergency descent and putting the masks on in the cockpit. But they do neither of these things, likely caused by the hypoxia disorienting them and being too busy trying to control the plane. Japan Air Tokyo tries several times to contact them using the selective call system, or CellCal, on a separate radio system to try and assist them with whatever is wrong with the plane. The incoming calls and several calls from air traffic control all go unanswered. The crew has now been fighting the plane for more than 15 minutes. The flight engineer then suggests lowering the landing gear, hoping it'll help increase drag and help the plane to descend and stabilize the aircraft. Normally the gear wouldn't lower because of the hydraulics being out of action, but there is both an electrical and gravity backup system that can drop the gear in an emergency such as this. It does help, but it also destroys the directional control the aircraft had by applying more power to one side of the plane. Several air traffic control calls go unanswered, including one from nearby American-controlled Yokota Air Base offering their assistance and runway for landing.
123, 507, right hard. If you hear me, attempt contact 179.4. Order for 360. Savannah 123, go ahead. Savannah 123, Roger, understood. And, Savannah 123、羽田にコンタクトしますか？コンタクトしますか？ It's Scanner 123, code approach on guard. If you hear me, squawk 5423. はい、了解しました。スタンバイ、お待ちください。
20 minutes in, the plane has now descended to below 12,000 feet. Both the fugoid cycle and hypoxia have begun to subside, and the crew are becoming more and more aware of the grave situation they're in. The plane also starts turning leftward away from Haneda again and into Japan's steep mountains surrounding Mount Fuji, the tallest in Japan. The plane engines are pushed to full power in order to climb and attempt to turn away, but as a result, this causes the fugoid cycle to return. In the frantic juggling of throttles, the pilots allowed the speed to drop too much. The plane soon pitches extremely high and enters an aerodynamic stall, beginning a very steep dive. The crew manages to recover, but now with every rise and fall of the plane, they're not that far above the mountaintops. The flaps begin to lower via the alternate electrical system in an attempt to get trim control to the plane and in turn help stabilize the fugoid cycle. While climbing a little steeply and frustratingly still flying away from Haneda and Yokota direction-wise, the plane does seem to be temporarily stable, but not fully controllable. At this point, nearly 30 minutes have elapsed since disaster started. But then the crew's luck runs out. As the flaps begin to lower, the plane starts to enter a shallow right-hand bank, likely caused by an asymmetrical flap trim. As they desperately try to put the flaps back up, a thrust imbalance occurs, worsening the bank, and the crew, already with their hands full, don't seem to notice. The plane suddenly dives at over 18,000 feet per minute. The crew are now desperate to stop this as a wall of mountains appear ahead, and the dreaded sound of the ground proximity warning system fills the cabin. (1856). The 747 clips a ridge on Mount Osutaka, one of the mountains north of Mount Fuji. It then flipped over 570 meters northwest from the second ridge near Mount Tagamagahara and exploded. The wreckage and bodies then tumbled down either side of the steep ridge. The crew of a US C-130, who was listening into the radio transmissions, spots the crash site 20 minutes later. The pilot later stated in interviews that he and his crew dispatched a Huey helicopter and a search and rescue team was on standby at Yokota with US Marines ready to rappel down to the site, but the Japanese government never called for their assistance. A Japanese Self-Defense Force helicopter, likely another Huey, spots the crash later that night, but returns back to base, reporting no sign of survivors, poor visibility from the smoke, and no safe place to land. Based on this report, the rescue teams did not set out that night, and instead build helicopter landing pads and tie down in a makeshift village to spend the night, 63 kilometers from the crash site. Unknown to them, they sealed the fate of many survivors. The next morning, rescuers finally arrive 14 hours after impact. Standing in front of them is the worst single plane crash in aviation history. Despite previous reports, they shockingly find 4 survivors, all of them female. Those being off-duty flight attendant Yumi Ochiai, age 26, 12-year-old Keiko Kawakami, sadly orphaned by the crash, as well as 35-year-old mother Hiroko and her 8-year-old daughter Mikiko Yoshizaki, who lost her father Yu, 9-year-old brother Mitsuyoshi, and 7-year-old sister Yukari. Also among the dead were Sakamoto, banker Akihizwa Yukawa, the father of violinist and composer Diana Yukawa, as well as the whole crew. Yumi Ochiai, while recovering in hospital from a broken pelvis and a fractured arm, told the depressing, haunting story of how many more survived the impact, waking to the sounds of their screams and the sounds and headlights of a helicopter. But as the chopper's sound faded away, so did the sounds of many of those survivors, almost as if their hope disappeared with the chopper. Doctors at the crash site agreed, with one stating, "If the discovery had come 10 hours earlier, we could have found more survivors." Keiko Kawakami shares a similar story, as initially her father and 7-year-old sister Sakiko initially also survived the crash, but just like many others, they would later die in the cold night air, waiting for rescue, leaving her all alone with the cold hands of her dead family. A horror no child should ever face. Hiroko recalled how her daughter, still trapped in her seat with seatbelts fastened, would shout at her, going, "Don't go to sleep, Mother! Stay awake or you'll die! I'm hungry, Mother!" It helped her survive the night until rescuers arrived, though she didn't fancy going back in the air in a helicopter to hospital. All 4 survivors were found to be seated in the last 7 rows, with sheer luck and reduced impact forces saving their lives. Families arrived near the crash site either by foot or by helicopter, dropping flower petals over the site from Chinook helicopters to pass on their farewells to the victims. Also found amidst the wreckage was several handwritten notes from some of the victims writing goodbyes to their families as they realized the gravity of their situation. Investigators soon arrive, including those from the National Transportation Safety Board. Since the 747 was an American-designed aircraft, they wanted to make sure there was nothing wrong with the 747's design, since back then, 747s were practically everywhere. Upon digging into the plane's archives, they find out that the plane was involved in 2 other accidents several years earlier. On June 2nd, 1978, while operating as JAL 115, the plane was coming in to land on runway 32 left at Itami Airport on the same exact route as 123. The plane bounced heavily on landing. The pilot then excessively flared, causing the tail to strike the runway, damaging the outer skin and puncturing the rear pressure bulkhead, which is basically a sideways metal umbrella meant to contain the high pressurized air inside the aircraft so passengers can breathe at cruising altitude. Another incident on August 19, 1982 saw the number 4 engine strike the runway upon landing in Chitose. This didn't contribute to the 123 accident, but it is worth mentioning considering what would later happen to the number 4 engine. After the tail strike, repairs were carried out by Boeing technicians and the aircraft was returned to service. However, upon discovering this bulkhead at the crash site, NTSB investigators couldn't believe their eyes. The repair was not carried out correctly. Only one row of rivets was holding the joint together where the new panel for the bulkhead was installed. 2 rows should have been there, as per correct repair procedures, meaning the rivets are carrying twice the load they should have been. Because of this, after several cycles of the plane taking off and landing, with a difference in air pressure outside versus inside the cabin, this faulty repair eventually failed and tore the rear pressure bulkhead apart. The high pressurized air as a result forced its way through the rear stabilizers and simply blew the tail clean off. From that point onward, the plane was doomed to crash. The pilots don't know, and will never know, that their tail was missing, blown into the sea with all the hydraulic lines with it that allowed the plane's control services to operate. Despite this, the crew heroically managed to somehow keep the plane aloft for more than half an hour, even if it was all in vain, as the plane entered the mountains, where it became next to impossible to survive. An amazing feat of flying, and quite the miracle regardless. To get an idea on what the crew was up against, 4 hand-picked flight crews took the same situation in a simulator, and not only did none of them land the plane, but they couldn't come close to keeping it in the air as long as the accident crew could. As a result, in 1987, the crew of JAL 123 was posthumously awarded the Polaris Award, the highest honor in aviation, for their efforts. After the investigation concluded, the crash left a telling mark in Japanese and aviation history. Boeing's reputation was damaged, but they took comfort in knowing that the crash had nothing to do with the design of the 747. The aircraft type continued on to become one of the most successful airframes in aviation history, with the SRs being retired in 2006 in favor of the 747-400D, Boeing 767 and 777s, with the 747 type overall being retired by JAL in 2011, being replaced by 787s and Airbus A350s, which operate the Haneda to Itami route today, albeit without the 123 flight number. Another crash under similar circumstances would occur in 2002, where 17 years after a tail strike, a Boeing 747-209B operating as China Airlines 611 would fall apart in midair due to a faulty repair. Japan Airlines was hit especially hard after the crash. Public confidence and bookings for domestic air travel plummeted by 25% in favor of other airlines or Japan's bullet train system. Japan Airlines then president Yasumoto Takagi resigned. Hiro Tomiengaga, a senior maintenance manager at Japan Airlines, as well as Suzumu Tajima, an engineer who had inspected and cleared the aircraft for flight prior to the crash, both committed suicide, likely from the shame and emotional pain related to the crash, as if they were directly responsible. Rumors abounded in Japan that the airline was indeed guilty for lapses in safety and inspections, and that Boeing took responsibility in order to protect a valuable customer of theirs. Japan Airlines, Boeing, and the Japanese government all paid substantial compensation to the victims' families, with Japan Airlines itself paying 780 million yen, or 7.6 million US dollars, to the victims' families as condolence money without admitting liability. That's more than $22 million in today's money. The captain's eldest daughter, Yoko Takahama, who was a high school student at the time of the crash, went on to become a flight attendant at Japan Airlines, likely in his honor. She keeps a worn-out photo of her father from his first flight, stating, "I carry it because I feel it protects the plane." A memorial stands near where the aircraft went down. Several pieces of the aircraft and passenger artifacts, including handwritten farewell notes, are on display at the Safety Promotion Center near Haneda Airport, opened in 2006. On the 2004 album Reis, Reis by the German band Rammstein, there's a hidden track occupying track 0 called Flugzeugalarm, or Airplane Alarm, containing the last few moments of JAL 123's cockpit voice recorder. The track and album itself were inspired by the events of the crash. Few CD releases have this Easter egg, and it's only possible with CD players that can rewind past track 1. On the Reprise Records version, the hidden track is merged with Reis, Reis, the first track. This did cause some controversy, as some saw the use and theme as insensitive, and as a result, the album cover differed in the Japanese release, seeing the USS Attica icebreaker ship replace the black box artwork in the original version. In 2024, 39 years after the crash, Japan Airlines president and CEO Mitsuoko Totoro visited the memorial. She began her career with the airline as a flight attendant in 1985, the year 123 went down. She said to reporters that day, "I renewed my awareness that there should be no compromise in safety." Now, 40 years have passed, and to this day, Japan Airlines 123 remains one of the worst aviation accidents in history, and with advancements in safety and inspection procedures, we hopefully will never have such a tragedy to such a scale ever occur again. Hello folks, Thunderbolt here. Now usually we talk about train wrecks on this channel. I mean, that's one of the only things people know this channel for, but this obviously was a standout, being a video on an aviation disaster. I'm not an expert on aircraft, let me make that clear. However, Japan Airlines 123 was an accident that really fascinated me over the years, namely how the crew managed to keep the plane aloft for over half an hour with little to no control to the aircraft. And it's also no secret Air Crash Investigations was one of the inspirations for my train wreck documentaries. Will I release another one of these? Likely not, as my expertise is in trains, not planes. Hey, that kinda rhymes. A very special thanks though goes to Gohan Chan for his in-depth simulation of Japan Airlines 123. This fellow ADHD nerd is specializing in 3D animation from start to finish of aviation disasters, starting with Japan Airlines 123. Like my videos, his 123 video was likely going to be a one-off attempt to try and make his channel relevant before fading into obscurity and focusing on his career. Well, 2 million views later, he received so much support that now he's working on other projects on other disasters, one of them being on the Space Shuttle Columbia. I know what it's like, pal, as my train wreck videos kinda share a similar story. Again, couldn't be possible without you, Gohan-chan, so best of luck. And thank you for watching, especially my channel members, donors, etc. I know some of my fans are also aviation geeks as well as rail fans, so hope they got some enjoyment out of it. As always, take care, and we'll see you next time. Sayonara.